Hello. Hello.
Hey,
Hey,
evening.
testing my microphone. Good evening.
Hello, good morning, actually, from my
Oh,
side.
good morning.
Morning.
What time is it where you're at?
It's 1 a.m.
Oh, well, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Can you see my screen? I'm sharing my screen.
Yes, I can see your screen. Thank you.
Oh, good, good.
Yes.
Fantastic. This is only my second Zoom meeting on my new laptop, which is a MacBook, and I'm typically a Windows person, and I'm having trouble adjusting to this. I like it, but it's a little different for me, so I'm always nervous about
Okay. I hope you're able to navigate without any
that.
technical.
I've got my iPad in front of me just in case. If you see me looking down, it's because I'm looking at my iPad to check out what's next.
Okay, no problem. Thank you.
Sure. But I'm really familiar with this presentation. So
Okay, are you gonna save it on YouTube or somewhere on IBA?
yeah, we're making a recording. Jordan, I don't know.
Yeah, yeah, we do have plans to put this up on YouTube. That's actually something I'm doing in the background, setting up our.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
Checking the time. Jordan, we probably give it a few minutes, right, before we get going.
I think so. I mean, yeah,
Yeah.
I think so.
Jordan, you think another minute?
Yeah, I think 7:05 should be perfect.
Sure. Okay, I got 7:05. Jordan, do you want to start us off tonight?
Sure. Yeah, thanks everyone
Sorry,
for
put you on the
joining
spot.
us. Oh, no, you're good. So my name is Jordan Eisbeck. I'm the president of the East Tennessee chapter of the IRBA. Excited for all of y'all to join us. We've got David Thompson giving a presentation on chapter 2 of the BABOK, and I I can't say enough about David and his knowledge of this material. So you are in very good hands tonight. This presentation will be up on YouTube shortly after the session. We'll send out an email after the event with a link. Yeah. So anyway, thanks for joining us, everyone. Over to you, David.
All right, thanks, Jordan. Yeah, Jordan, thank you. Welcome everybody. Tonight, if you've never joined a East Tennessee IIBA study session, we do these almost monthly. We say monthly, but sometimes we skip a month here and there, depending on people's schedules and that kind of stuff. But what we've been doing and we're continuing to do in 2025 here is go over the BABOK. For people, people who want to learn more about business analysis, maybe learn some new things, or folks that are interested in any of the certifications, the IIBA core certifications. And that's really what a lot of people focus on too, is getting certifications, whether it's the ECBA, the CCBA, CBAP, any of those that are based directly on the BABOK. We focus on that, and I try to give study tips on those as well. Last month we had a session on just it was an overview of IABA, and also we talked about PMI's business analysis certifications, and talked about study strategies and everything like that. So that's a good resource. That's one we try to do at least once a year, and so what we're doing now is we're really kicking it off again. We're going to consistently go through the BABOK over the next several months. We are going to throw in, not exactly sure which month, we are going to throw in a monthly study session about product ownership analysis. So that's a really great topic, especially with a lot of teams doing agile. But tonight's topic is about key concepts and business analysis planning and monitoring. Key concepts is like the very beginning of the BABOK. And if you're taking the ECBA exam and the CCBA, well, the CCBA or the CBAP, I'll go. But definitely, if you're taking the ECBA, that's a good area to study on the key concepts. Business analysis planning and monitoring, also called BAPM, is the first knowledge area in the BABOK. So, as I said before, everything we do in here is based on the BABOK. I'm David Thompson. You see I have some initials out past my name. I've done the CBAP and CPOA and AAC. I'm also Scrum Alliance certified as a Scrum Master and product owner as well. So I've been teaching on the BABOK for about 3 or 4 years now, and it's a pleasure of mine to do this. I'm definitely glad to be affiliated with the IIBA in East Tennessee. I'm past president, and now Jordan is leading our chapter and really doing a great job. So we're going to continue these. So enough about that. Let's dig into the topic here. So let's see if I can get my Mac to work right. Okay, good. As I said before, everything we're doing in here is based on the BABOK. So while I do put a little bit of spin and my interpretation on things, if you are planning to take any certification tests, you definitely need to know. Oops, sorry, let me go back. I have this touchy, it's called a magic trackpad. Oops, there I am going further and further. Let's see. Let's see, I'll go page up. Okay, yeah, here we go. Everything we do is about the BABOK, especially if you're taking going to take any of the certification exams. It's good to know the BABOK inside and out as much as possible. And then also some of the material that I talk about is garnered from Watermark Learning's CBAP certification. They've got some, it's a great, it's actually, I think, a little bit thicker than the BABOK itself, but it kind of does a great job of interpreting. And that's a resource that I found extremely valuable when I was studying for my CBAP. So let's see, so we'll start off talking about the business analysis core concepts. Here are some of the things we're just going to really, we don't have time to go into every little detail. Obviously, we're going to do a knowledge area and the key concepts. So just give you a quick overview, but it's really important to, if you've started reading the BABOK, if you've never read the BABOK, you know, I tell people it's a sure cure for insomnia. If you can't sleep at night, it'll put you to sleep. You really need to read it when you're awake in the daytime. But you know, definitely if you're interested in any of the certification exams, knowing these key concepts, these are just core through all of the certification exams. So there's things like the BACCM, the business analysis core concept model. There's key terms, and we'll go over some of those at really high level. There's the requirements classification schema. And there's a little bit, we'll talk about stakeholders, and then what is requirements in design. So let's see. I think I'm going to stick to my keyboard for going up and down in this. So let's start with business analysis core concept model. The business analysis core concept model, let's see, there we go, is the way of classifying every knowledge area that you have. Every knowledge area has, you know, you need to think about what the changes are that are made, what the solutions are, in what context, what is the value of the solution, who are your stakeholders, and what are their needs. And here's a mnemonic that Watermark suggests. So I've organized them in that way. They say, in order to remember this, and if you are going to take an exam, it's good to learn these: vision, success, value, solution, need, stakeholder, change, context. You just use the first letter of these to help you remember that. And it's a tool to help you remember some of this. You don't necessarily have to have it all memorized, but this helps when you're thinking about you know, some of the questions that might be on one of the exams, or just, you know, in your daily life. It helps you to remember those from your business analysis that you're doing from day to day. But if you'll see this diagram, this is directly out of the BABOK. You'll see that on every knowledge area of the BABOK, that it applies this core concept model. And the BABOK explains how each knowledge area is affected by each of these core concepts. So it's something you'll see over and over again in the BABOK for every knowledge area. What is BACCM? It's the basis for business analysis. You know, it's a conceptual framework for all the business analysis work. Each of them are interrelated. What they said, this is direct from BABOK, and transit industries and change initiatives are global perspectives. Each of them is equally important. When you think about it, yeah, there really are things you have to take into account for every initiative that you work on. It's critical for helping you understand all the business analysis tasks that you're doing. You can see you'll see this throughout my presentation. Anywhere there's an exam tip or a study tip, it's really important to know the BACCM. I said inside and out. Know the BACCM inside and out. That's what I suggest if you're taking any of the exams. So we'll break this down. What is each one? What change? You know, the BABOK defines it as an act of transformation in response to a need. You need to think about when you're working on an initiative, what are the kind of changes we're doing? Here's a couple of examples: process improvement or resolving some issues. This is we need to make a change to resolve issues or improve this process, or there are other different changes you need to. It's important for the team to align on what those changes are, and then the need. Obviously, business analysis is a response to what their business needs are. There's an opportunity or some kind of problem. Business might come up with, oh, we need this and we need that. We need, there's always there's the 5 whys you can use to kind of really find out what the real need is. The couple of options here, are examples. Increase the number of customer orders. Why do you need to increase the number of customer orders? Because we're not making enough money, and our products, we have too much inventory, for example. Whatever. As you get into it, you can get more into the core need of what is. You need to stabilize the system that's frequently offline due to system crashes. There's some kind of we need to figure out what's going on here. We need to figure out. You start thinking of solutions once you understand the core need. The solution. A lot of times we think of the solution before we really have a good understanding of what the need is. But that's just how we are. That's how a lot of folks are wired. They're like, oh, I can fix this. No. You don't even know the problem, but I can fix it. So, a lot of times it's like, hey, we didn't know we had a problem, but we see this shiny new object and we know that that's a solution. Well, what's the need? What's the business need? What are you trying to accomplish? What are your goals? What's the business value for that? And asking about that, But the solution, could always be like a new system or a process change or something like that. So that gives a little bit of background on what the solution could be. Stakeholders. And it's important. We'll talk a little bit more about stakeholders when we talk about BACCM itself, business analysis, planning, and monitoring. But here's a good breakdown of what some stakeholders could be. These are the folks that you go to that are going to be impacted or have a stake in what's being changed, or what the initiative is, or what the problem is. And so here's some examples, customers, domain subject matter experts. It's always good to know the people that know what's really going on. Those could be like support people or technical folks, or the folks that are impacted by it. The end users could also be the customers, the project managers who are kind of help bring this along, regulators, which is really important, especially if you're working in an industry where there is some government oversight or accountability that is needed for different regulations. Who sponsors are, who your sponsors could be, and then maybe who some suppliers are. As you go through the BABOK and you think about your day-to-day work, you'll think about these stakeholders. Sometimes their titles may be different, but it's a really good idea. We'll talk a little bit about a stakeholder matrix that is a really good way to help track who your stakeholders are a little bit later. What is the context? This is about what is happening. What are the circumstances? It says that are influenced or that influence or are influenced by of the change. The change is in the middle and context. What is being changed? Well, how is this going to impact that? So here's some examples. Our competitors have a solution that makes customer ordering easier, and we're losing customers to them. You think about it. We're all that way as consumers. You're like, I like this website better. I can get what I need. Order when I'm making an order. I prefer to go with this solution instead. That's the context. As a company will notice that and say, "Wow, what do we need to do to fix that?" If there's always something that will come up and say, "Well, we need to be able to plan for the future, and we need to be able to grow." Maybe there's this last one is maybe there's, I don't know if you're familiar with a lot of the consumer privacy laws that happen where a customer can just have their account totally removed from your company and get all their data back. These data privacy laws, they require, and that's definitely a context that you need to consider and coming up with a solution. Essentially the laws have changed, or something that you have to take advantage of. That context can sometimes be a very, very large driver for a need for a solution. So I won't read through all these, I promise. But an exam tip here: get to know these terms. Obviously, business analysis, that's a key one. The practice of enabling change in an enterprise by defining needs and recommending solutions that deliver value to stakeholders. That's something you definitely get tested on. Knowing what those are. But these are terms that just once you understand them and use them, they just become part of your living and breathing work of your business analysis. Design, enterprise, organization, plan, requirement. If you've been a business analyst for a while or done any kind of business analysis work, you probably use the word requirement 50 times a day. Risk is something that we as business analysts help to identify and analyze impact. But certainly, if you've been a project manager before, your risk is something that's always on your mind. So I definitely would suggest reading through these. There's a lot of good examples of these in the BABOK, and just make yourself very familiar with those. Let's see, requirement classification schema. And I love this. I argue over sometimes, when we're classifying requirements, I feel like it's a good idea to classify requirements if you can, especially if you're using a requirements traceability matrix. I like to categorize. I'll also show an example of a requirements traceability matrix, I believe, in this presentation. Yeah, to be able to classify how your requirements are, whether they're functional requirements, transitional requirements, non-functional requirements, business requirements. Business requirements can be stakeholder requirements too. So there's a fine line between some of these, but the BABOK goes into really good detail on those. I would certainly make yourself familiar with these different types of requirements in the BABOK. And then stakeholders. Here's more examples of some stakeholders. As you can see, we went through some of these already, but yeah.
Hey,
is there a question?
Hi, yeah, good question. Just the transition requirements and how it relates to context. Thank you so much. How does that relate to context? Essentially, when we look at stakeholder identification, and then from there, making sure that we identify the proper stakeholders, reach out to them without stepping out of bounds within our own team.
Yeah, well, I think it's important, as you're identifying, help me if I'm not getting your question correctly, but I did first identifying those stakeholders and I like to always track what their stake is, not just who they are and what their role is or their title is, what their stake is in the solution or the initiative that we're doing. And then a transition requirement is something that may impact them. For example, it could be organizational change management. It could be a matter of data transformation, transitioning from one state to another, from one solution to another, identifying for example, what changes on a system, what data needs to be staged to be ready for the system, how are users going to be trained. Those kind of things are really transition requirements. So working with your stakeholders and being able to understand what their real stake is, what their potential bias is. Let's say, for example, you're working with a stakeholder who's not really tech savvy or doesn't really like tech savvy solutions, and maybe his or her team will be maybe need a little more hand-holding as far as embracing perhaps more of a technical solution. That would be something that you want to make note of in your stakeholder matrix, and think about that, especially when you think about those transition requirements and anything that they might need.
Yeah, the transition requirements really help because what we're doing is basically going from one system to another system, but just the data wise. So, but like you said, the stakeholders are extremely important. Stakeholders are extremely important. Know the stake, why they have the stake, and also have a clear picture and vision of the data elements that are moving, and then user training, of course, that you mentioned. That really helped a lot. So, thank you.
All right. Yeah,
Yeah.
great. Glad to help answer that. Yep, sure. Let's see. And then finally about the key concepts, definitely talking about the difference between the different types of requirements like we were talking about, and where design fits in, right? Design is something that you're always thinking about. The requirements lend themselves to the design. And this is something, especially when you're doing a requirements traceability matrix. You want to see in that matrix where the design is fulfilled, where the requirement is fulfilled by the design. So, for example, if there's a granular business requirement to make the system perform at a certain, and forgive me, I always think about systems. I'm an IT guy, but if the system's supposed to perform within a certain amount of time, process a certain thing, you want to show in the design where that requirement is fulfilled, so that your stakeholders can see it, and it also can show where that requirement not only is fulfilled in the design, but where it's been tested and signed off on as a real solution, so that the value of eliciting that requirement from the stakeholders and creating a design for it is fulfilled, and the value is brought to bear for those stakeholders. And that really helps. That helps bring you, especially maybe thinking about it from a transition or organizational change management perspective. You're showing the stakeholder that you heard the requirement, we documented, we designed a solution for it, we've tested it, and it's ready to go when we transition to start using the solution. So yeah, so that's the key concepts. Any questions about that before we move into the BAPM, Business Analysis Planning and Monitoring? Yes.
Hi. So another question. When we talk, we also mentioned the context of circumstances that influenced by about 3 slides back. In the context of how do you define a context with differing with data changing from one system to another system, and you're mostly just doing functional requirements, sort of? On the functional requirement side?
Well, I think of context and more on the way of, the circumstances or with that change. For example, what's the context of a change that's requiring to move data from one system to another? Maybe it's moving from a legacy system to an ERP system, for example, and there may be some the context may be for the purposes of being being able to audit the system better, be able to have a traceability of any of the system changes, for example. The context would be in the context we're moving to this new solution in order to get us to the point where we're in compliance with any of these regulations, for example.
So that would be the overall context, and say why you would be moving from one system to another system, but
Right.
not only just thank you, or not only just one system to another system, but also what would be some of the non-functional requirements around that as well. You should worry about that because it's used a lot. Like if you think about data retention and stuff between systems, so you could possibly do that as well, right, sir?
Yeah, I would say for sure. Yeah, what are the circumstances beyond that are driving the change?
Right.
What is the business driver and maybe the regulatory driver, an example I was using. But yeah, definitely keeping those in mind.
Appreciate that. Thank you so much, sir.
Yeah,
Thank you.
sure. All right. Glad to answer. Let's see. So now we'll move on and start talking about BAPM. And first time I heard anybody say BAPM, I thought they were saying Batman. So I was like, what do you know? Well, that's how we call business analysis, planning, and monitoring. So if you hear anybody say BAPM, you know they're talking about business analysis, planning, and monitoring. But this is like the first knowledge area that the BABOK digs into, and it's not always the first one that we get drawn into as business analysts, or those who may not be a titled business analyst, but if you're doing the work of business analysis, sometimes you're dropped in the middle of requirement solicitation without going through this foundational step. Sometimes you have to kind of throw your hands up and say, what are we doing and why are we doing this and how are we doing this? Sometimes you have to do this at night because you've been thrown into a project meeting you just heard about. So business analysis, planning, and monitoring is something, even if you don't start out with it, it's good to go back to it and make sure that you're planning and kind of playing catch up with it. I like, there's some really good lessons in this knowledge area. But anyway, it's what helps coordinate and plan how business analysis will occur. Helps kind of set the table for how you're going to do analysis. Oops, I just moved that again. What you need to figure out what needs to be done to perform the analysis, how you're going to manage that effort and monitor it. That's a key thing, monitoring how well it's working. And then also how to improve the work of business analysis. How could we do this better next time? So with all of the knowledge areas in the BABOK, you'll get this this kind of context. And I've created this from what the BABOK has. Everything has an input and everything has an output, and then it identifies the tasks that happen during each of these knowledge areas. So in order to do the tasks in here, which are plan the business analysis approach, plan stakeholder engagement, plan business analysis governance, plan business analysis information management, and identify business analysis performance improvements, the inputs for that are what are the initiatives, the needs, business needs, what are we doing, why are we doing this initiative, and then what are some performance objectives, and those could be things that you might have to dig up by working with the stakeholders, for example, and what we're hoping to get out of a solution, what their ultimate goal is. So some of and this is real simple too. If you look at the task, the output of each task is, planning the business analysis approach. Your output should be the business analysis approach. Same thing with stakeholder engagement approach, you get that. Governance approach, information management approach, and then your business analysis performance assessment. So the tasks all have their own similarly named output. The reason why they have numbers in front of them, 3.1, 3.2, 3.3, these are all, 3 is the chapter number where business analysis, planning, and monitoring is in the BABOK. And so for the other knowledge areas, there'll be like 4, 5, 6. So you'll be able to remember those. It's important, particularly if you're taking the CCBA or the CBAP exam, to know all the inputs, all the outputs, and all the tasks for all the knowledge areas. So just a word about that. We'll dig into each one of these areas throughout this. So let me just check in the time here. We're good. So let's start off with this, planning the business analysis approach. So you think about this in a perfect world, and the BABOK outlines for us a perfect world. None of us probably, I hope I'm not alone in saying this, none of us live in a perfect business analysis world. The BABOK is its own area, and it would be nice if our day-to-day work went the way the BABOK shows us. No matter how hard you try, you just can't make it be that perfect. But ideally, you have the opportunity when you're brought in to work on an initiative, to have the time to think, to sit there and think about how we're going to do this analysis. Sometimes you're just doing this a few minutes before you go into your first meeting for a project or whatever. But taking that time to plan our approach, how are we going to do this? What type of initiative is this? Is this the type of initiative where it's predictive, where we we're going to go ahead and do all of our business analysis. We're going to document all the requirements. And then when we're satisfied with that and everything's got a nice bow on it, then we're going to start executing. Or it's an adaptive one. Let's build a minimal viable product and see how it goes, and do this iteratively, and have our requirements be just in time depending upon our needs. And so understanding the approach of the build of the solution or the initiative itself is really helpful to that. That helps for you to identify as a business analyst, what's the formality level. Am I going to need formal business requirements documents, BRDs, or am I just going to do user stories with acceptance criteria, in a system like Jira or something like that? What are some of the business analysis activities am I going to need to do? Do I need to do things like elicitation of requirements, or are they already spelled out for us? Do I need to understand who the stakeholders are? Try to do surveys, use techniques like focusing on focus groups. What are some of the things? What are some of the activities do we think we're going to have to do in order to make this initiative move along? How are we going to time them? Are they, is it going to be? Are we going to do this within a period of 3 months or 2 weeks or 2 years? What are the activities? Giving us time to think about what this looks like. Sometimes you're working very closely with product owners or project managers or other analysts, other subject matter experts, trying to understand this. And one of the keys is figuring out what some of the risks are for the approach and how we're gonna handle risks, and making sure that whatever approach you decide on, making sure that the stakeholders are on board on that. So that's a key first step. Planning the stakeholder engagement, that's key, is understanding who your stakeholders are. Sometimes that takes a little bit of digging on behalf of the business analyst. I've had projects where I've been engaged on where the project manager said, "Oh, here are the stakeholders. We've already done this work." And then you start asking questions, and you realize maybe there's a few more stakeholders that we haven't thought of. Who else will be impacted by this change or this initiative? So a RACI chart is a really good thing to have. I got a quick example. I think all of us have probably worked with RACI charts. I have a real funny example of one. Like I said before, understanding the attitudes or perspectives, and maybe the biases of the stakeholders. They're not very pleased with this SAP system, or they don't like using Macintosh or something. They're not really wanting to do things the way we do it at corporate. They want to do it their own way, things like that. You kind of think about those things in order to help manage them. These are things you should document. Ask the stakeholders what their goals are. They may differ from other stakeholders. That's a really good thing to find out. When you get to the end and you have a solution in place, and you realize their one stakeholder group doesn't like what has been done. One stakeholder group loves. Well, they had different goals and different objectives. So it's good to know that early, and by planning that stakeholder engagement. A couple of other key things that I'd like to think about are their geographic location. How do we engage them? Maybe they're across the world in a different time zone. And when we want to meet every day at noon Eastern time, it's 2:00 in the morning where they're at, right? So that might not be the best time to reach that stakeholder group. You don't want to miss out on their input. Maybe you have to adjust. I had a team get mad at me one time because every morning at 7 a.m. we needed to work with a team that was in another time zone. That was the best time to get them. Otherwise, they were having to stay up late. So, it's a little give and take. Maybe there's a difference in language. Maybe you need to engage some software or something, or get folks that can help translate. Maybe this is a little bit of organizational change management. So I talk a lot about stakeholder engagement because I think it is so key. Building relationships with their stakeholders, understanding what their pain is, or what their bias is, or what their level of interest is, really helps to drive for a more successful initiative. So here's an example, or I won't go over it, but here's an example. I found this on the web from some website for project managers, but I liked it because it's the Lord of the Rings movie book, racy chart. So I think this is a funny one, but you can see who's consulted, who's responsible, who's accountable, and who's informed. This is a lot of times this helps to surface some of these. I just want to be informed of this. I don't have to be held accountable for it. I don't want to be responsible for this. Whatever that is. Definitely a racy chart is a great technique to utilize, and the BABOK talks a little bit more about racy charts. So something to keep in mind. We won't dwell on that. But planning, business analysis, governance, that's one of the next tasks. Determine who your key decisions, who can make your key decisions. It's like, oh, well, we're just going to say this is good. Well, if some person isn't able to make that decision, what's the escalation path? Who is there for example, a steering committee for the group? Who's authorized to make these changes? And you need to define that escalation path. What do we do about changes? Things that might impact the cost, time. Maybe you're bringing in a partner to help you work on it, and their time and materials. And wow, this could really blow up the budget. Example, understanding that, and just say, oh yeah, we'll go do this now. So the budget doesn't get blown up or whatever. How you're going to document and communicate those changes. Who signs off on them is a really key. This is a step. Typically, project managers own this, but the business analysts can really help. And number one, in helping to enforce this, and also to make sure that that it's well documented on what that plan is, and also making sure sometimes we get to be responsible for making sure that folks are following the governance process. And if you're not following the governance process, a lot of times that can get you into trouble with your stakeholders and with the steering committee if there's a steering committee on the project. So it's a great idea for the BA or the person doing the business analysis task to be able to make sure that the team is on board with how we're going to do our information management as well. How are we going to all these documents that we're creating on this initiative? We have all these spreadsheets, these Word documents, and maybe we have these flow charts. How are we going to share this? How are we going to where are we going to store it? We're going to put it in SharePoint, or we're going to put it in a network drive somewhere. How are we going to print them all out, or whatever that approach is? Figuring out what we really need to do there. That's a key, because you'll find some projects where people just put it wherever they want to, and then when at the end of the initiative, you're like, okay, where's all our designs and everything? You have to do a little bit of detective work to make sure you got everything. Plan out how you're going to trace requirements to design. The requirements traceability matrix is a great way. I'm pretty sure I have an example of that. The next slide that shows where those requirements are. I talked a little bit about this as far as in a transition. You could have transition requirements, as well, to show how the requirement is fulfilled in the design, and then also along with each requirement, think about some of the regulations, and the risks of specific requirements, and help to track some of those things down. And here's a very, very simple example of a requirements traceability matrix. this is an example I've used in the past. And just a couple of quick things about it. First, your first column, this is just a simple spreadsheet. I like to do these in spreadsheets because you can filter these and you can sort them. It's good that every requirement should have its own unique identifier. Give it a good description. I understand what the priority is of that requirement. This is all these requirements are high priority, of course. And there have been a lot of stakeholder interviews on this. This is all made up, of course, but and there's a lot of different stakeholder requirements, non-functional requirements. Here's a transition requirement. I like to do an objective of requirements. That's not something that necessarily talk. What's the point of this requirement? Design ref is if let's say you're working in a system like Jira. Oh goodness, all right, I went up. Let's say you're working in a system like Jira. You maybe put a link to that design ref, or if you have a design document, you can have a link to that design document and what section in that design document where that requirement is fulfilled. If you're having test cases documented, wherever you have those documented, you can have a reference to where the test case is. You can have a status of where that requirement is. It's being designed or being built or tested or implemented, whatever that status is. And then you have a section for comments. This is a real simple template that you can use and adapt and add columns to it. I've had requirements traceabilities that had twice as many columns on it, some with fewer, but just something you can adapt. This is a pretty simple way of starting to collect those requirements. I've even taken a requirements traceability matrix and exported it and to import into Jira itself to make sure that all those requirements are in Jira and traced there as well. And then I put back the Jira number into the traceability matrix. So it's a great thing to do. It's something I would recommend checking out. This is a tough one, this next one about identifying BA performance improvements. But it's always good. It's kind of like what they say, sharpening the saw, making sure that you're continuing to improve as you go along. How are we going to measure how well we've done on this business analysis that we're working on? You're establishing your performance targets for that. And identifying throughout the initiative, how well things are going, understanding if these are the key ones that the BABOK suggests, your accuracy and completeness, is what you're doing correct. Does the business analyst have the knowledge and skills and experience? You might be dropped into a project in a domain that you're not familiar with. Making sure that you have the skills and experience needed or maybe you're building those skills in the initiative that you're working on. Are the things that you're coming up with? Let's say you're doing flow charts. Are they having a desired effect, or stakeholders scratching their head over your flow chart because they can't read it? Are you getting the support that you need from the organizational resources? Is what you're doing significant? Was the cost and effort of business analysis justified? A lot of times people say, why do we need business analysts for? If we're helping, I like to say business analysis, one of the great things about it is it helps to bring that common understanding, help building those pathways between stakeholders and development teams or solution providers, to making sure that they're all on the same page and that the solutions that is being built or implemented is driving the value that the team is expecting. So were the strategic objectives met? Was the solution that built or the improvements made really having an effect in making those strategic goals being met? And was the work delivered on time? These are some things you can think about when you're thinking about performance improvements and tracking your work or the work of your teammates, and holding each other, especially if you're on an initiative where there are multiple business analysts, making sure that the team is being held accountable and always striving to improve. So. Oh, we've made it to the end. My goodness. Any questions about BAPM?
Just a quick question. In when what was the difference between stakeholder requirements and stakeholder requirements? Everything is stakeholder requirements, right, sir?
Yeah, the business requirement, it depending depending on who your stakeholder is, and you can categorize them as a stakeholder requirement or a business requirement. Let's say, for example, you have technical requirements. You can say this is one of the stakeholders is as a technical person, maybe a system administrator. They may have a specific requirement, or security admin. Let's say that's even a better one, because the security team might say you have to have such and such encryption on a solution, and they're one of the stakeholders. Versus it's not necessarily a business requirement. The business is saying we need to implement a solution that allows us to transmit data, blah blah blah. The security requirement, you could even call it a security requirement, I would say, just to make it plain and clear. But they are a stakeholder, and making sure. I think you can use the terms interchangeably depending upon the context of the stakeholder. There's no there's nothing chiseled in stone on that, by definitely. And the requirements traceability matrix gives you that flexibility to do that.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, and so you basically trace the requirements. Okay, these are the stakeholder, these are the transition requirements. I like how that worked essentially.
Yeah, going back to this, yeah, essentially,
Yeah, thank you.
this is a key artifact, I think, to be able to say what were those requirements, how did we fulfill them. If you look at this, if you were to use this as an example and say, well, this one what we're seeing on screen is obviously not been implemented yet, right? So there's no design reference, so the design hasn't been done yet. This would be early on, when you're at the requirement solicitation stage at this point, right?
Mhm.
You're gathering these requirements. Yeah, a lot of people don't like the word gathering requirements. You're listing these requirements, you documenting these requirements, but you're still not to the stage. You can see, because these columns are blank, that you don't have a design reference for them. You haven't tested them. There's no real status on them because you're just at the point of getting these requirements out. So, yeah, this can be a very powerful tool.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, sir.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Like I said, I like to do this in Excel because I can sort these columns and I can filter, and say, hey, what are all our high priority requirements? Well, in this state, they're all high. This is probably me. I just put high on every one and copy and paste it. But you could have some that are lower requirements. Of course, for a stakeholder, if they're gonna mention a requirement, it's probably high priority to them. So,
Right.
and this is
Because it has to be it has to be stakeholder. They have to be stakeholder, right? But if you're saying transition, and which seems like in a transition, especially data field, when it's data related, would you treat that differently? Meaning, would you say it's data requirements almost and refer
you could.
the CBDA, right? Right.
There's really no. I mean, those categories of requirements that the BABOK lists, they're not chiseled in stone either. As I said before, you can call them what you want, I think, and I don't think there's anything holding us to calling them by the requirement classification that they use, because we live in the real world, like I said, right?
Yeah.
So we can call them whatever. My whole thing, and I've said this before, is just making sure that we, doing the business analysis work, are bringing that common understanding to our stakeholders. And like I said, I hate to keep harping on this traceability matrix, but this is that way. And we'll see this when we start talking about requirement solicitation, and especially requirements analysis and design definition, in future BABOK chapters, that this can be the basis for that. This can be the basis of getting the stakeholders together and getting agreement on what the priorities are, and bringing that common understanding so that the stakeholders understand what some of those key things are that other stakeholders might be looking for, and helping with that negotiation so that you get a better fitting solution for all the stakeholders and not just one group of stakeholders. I remember I was on a project years and years ago. Luckily, I wasn't the BA on this project, but that the development team heard some requirements, went off for like 6 months or 8 months and built a solution for it.
Mhm.
And at the end of it, they delivered this solution, and the stakeholders essentially said, "We can't use this. Our requirements have changed. They were just in this vacuum, in this room developing this solution, and they weren't working with all of the stakeholders to make sure that their needs are being fulfilled, and that the solution that they were working on was meeting that criteria that was needed, and they weren't aware of any of the changes. So that was a lesson learned by that team, to say, making sure that all the stakeholders are on the same page and they've all signed off on the requirements, and all agree on the priority of those requirements. This is a real key thing. So, yeah.
Thank you. Thank
You're
you.
welcome.
Yeah, thank you. And then check the sign off and the feedback on that requirement as well, right?
Yeah, you could have a column on there on the date it was signed off on, and the context of that. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, like I said, you can expand this matrix out multiple columns, whatever meets your need, for sure.
Thank you, sir.
Mhm. Yeah. Oh, there it is. Oh,
David,
PowerPoint.
just a quick question. Sorry.
Yes.
I just want to find out, would you use the requirements matrix? Let's say you have the BRD is already approved and signed off, and during the system development by the developers, then we identify another new requirement. What would you then do? Would you use the requirement traceability requirement? Would you go and open the document that has already been approved, or what would happen then?
Yeah, that's a great question. This is what I would do. If after you've done your requirements traceability matrix, and you have your requirements listed in a BRD that has been signed off on, that would be definitely a change. We were talking earlier about the governance approach. What do we do about that? Hopefully, and you're working on your business analysis planning, that you're thinking about what that government approach is and what those steps are. So it could be different by project, but depending upon what the initiative participants and the project management and the stakeholders have agreed upon for the change management process. But definitely, yeah, it sounds to me like you would want to update your requirements traceability matrix, and then also, depending on what your change part is, either make an amendment and get another sign off on that amendment to your BRD, or maybe it's a separate change. It could be different depending on how you're defining your governance approach. Does that help?
Yes, it does help, but sorry, in
Sure.
this case, they said I must do a post UAT document. Then I should add one of those requirements, like two of those new requirements that were identified.
Okay. Are those like enhancements that users that were doing the UAT found and said, "Hey, we really needed to do this instead"? Is that kind of how that was?
One of them was a look and feel, to say
Yeah.
like we have modified the look and feel of this page, things like that. So I was like, okay, fine, we can add it. And then the other one, it was something that the user would have to do. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, I always like to plan for, what I've heard from project managers before is, when are you going to be done with the requirements, right? And they're like, okay, well, we have to go through system testing, and we have to go through user acceptance testing. Typically, it depends on the initiative though. User acceptance testing is the scary point. It's like a slippery slope when the users can give their feedback, and they will be able to say, oh, no, I like this, but I want a radio button here instead of a checkbox, or no, I don't like the layout of this. There are new requirements that come out of UAT. And so as a project, you need to say, okay, we hear you. We're going to document that. Maybe we'll do that later. Or it's like, oh, we have to do this before we go further on in this project. That goes back to that whole change process too. It's like, what are we going to do about it? Do we send the developers back to make this fix now? Or do we say, okay, well, we heard you want it to look like that. The next version will make it look that way, for example. So that goes back to depending upon what the approach is, the change management approach. That's a key point. So you're right, though. The UAT can delve when your users delve into the UAT, they can come up with all kinds of new requirements that maybe you haven't heard before. Sometimes your representatives of your stakeholders may not really understand. If you're one of your stakeholders is a manager of some team, maybe they don't get their hands on the system or the process or whatever. As maybe they don't understand it as well as the people that are actually going to be using it. So when you have the UAT, user acceptance testing, you really get some new things pop up sometimes. It's definitely something that happens. But I would say, yeah, definitely go back to the project governance project process and just make sure that that the team is on board. And there could be the point of like, hey, let's decide whether we do this now or we do this later. Does that help anymore?
Yes, it does help. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. You're welcome. I think the key is just making sure, and that goes back to this business analysis plan. Make sure that you help define that governance approach and make sure that it's documented on an initiative. And like I said, a lot of times the project managers do that themselves. They're like, oh, we'll do that. We do that. You kind of a fight over who gets to do that. But as business analysis professionals, we can be there and say, no, let's make sure that we document this. Let's make sure that all of our stakeholders understand that process so that there are not changes that are popping up all the time that are going to turn a 3-month project into a 3-year project. So yeah, great example of how work that's impacting you, I'm sure. And yeah, we can go back. I like to think of the BABOK as the tool. I use the BABOK. I've been in CBAP for like 4 years now, and I go back to the BABOK. I have the PDF version on my computer, and I just bring it up every now and then just to kind of remind me of where I should be. What are the right steps? And I don't have it all memorized, of course, but I use it as a tool to go back and say, well, this is the way the BABOK says it, even though we all live in the real world. But it's super helpful to go back to that and say, it's like, this is a great approach, and getting your coworkers on board with it as well. So yeah. I think we're out of time now. Jordan, anything else you would like to add?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks so much, David, for the presentation. We'll have a follow-up email after this with links to the recording and other details. So yeah, thanks everyone for joining us.
Yeah, and to Jordan, I can also, I've got a template of that requirements traceability matrix. I'd be glad to add if you want to include that.
Oh,
as
yes,
well.
yes.
Yeah.
Please do that. We'll attach that to the email.
Sure. Great. It's a good starting point. Fantastic. Thanks everybody for joining. It was really nice to be able to talk to you guys now. I hope you have a great evening.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.